So today we're tackling one of the toughest parts of preschool teaching, and that's helping preschoolers with feelings of anxiety or nervousness. So we'll explore some practical tools and supportive strategies to help you confidently manage those emotional hurdles. And Meg is joining us again today as our special guest host for this social emotional learning series. So welcome, Meg.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back again. I'm excited to tackle a new topic today on feeling anxious or feeling nervous. Kind of starts right at the beginning of the school year, doesn't it? Sometimes with that separation anxiety at drop off on the very first day of the school year. Let's get into it. Let's get into these practical strategies that are so helpful for all of us to hear. What misconceptions do teachers have about kids who feel anxious or nervous? What sometimes even those misconceptions that teachers have, it makes managing the behaviors even harder because the teacher's not quite understanding what does that mean for them.
So I think that sometimes in my experience, it's been that feeling of that child is ruining my day, or that child is ruining the first day of school. If we're talking about separation anxiety, there's lots of different forms of feeling nervous or anxious. Their behavior is challenging to us, but I have some breaking news. That is, it's not about us. It's not about you if we're talking to you, the listener here. And we have to remember that it's not about me and how it's making me feel and how it's challenging me. If we really think back to behavior and what its real purpose is, it's to communicate, right? So if all behavior, as they say, is communication, what is that child telling me that they need by feeling anxious or nervous and displaying these feelings physically, maybe by crying or an outburst of some sort or running after their parent, or if we're talking about separation anxiety? What does that mean that I need to do for the child? So, what I need to do is put on my detective hat and figure out exactly what part of the whole thing is making this child feel this way. And if you've been around the block and you've taught for more than a day or two, or a year or two, rather, you might be able to pick out some things right away because your little antenna on top of your head have perked up and you know that some kids feel this way because, and you've had another child that felt this way. And so you've got some tools in your toolbox to figure out what's going on. And I think that if we just remember it's not about us and it's all behaviors communication, that's the first thing that if we let go of that feeling, that's going to really help.
These behaviors in preschool are very normal. What you just said was really big there, that all behavior is communication. That's it, right? It's not about the teacher. And I know we all wish, and myself included, that if I was only doing everything perfectly, this wouldn't be happening. That's our wish. And that's not the reality. They are communicating something to us, often just that they're missing a skill, as you and Dancy Romaine like to say, that there's a missing piece here that they need filled in.
And especially at the beginning of the year, Meg, and you probably know this too, being an experienced teacher, is that sometimes the feelings of anxiousness or nervousness that our children are displaying don't come from them, actually. It comes from the parent who may be anxious about the child starting school. And the parent has not intentionally, but inadvertently put these feelings onto their child, right? And so that can put a lot of pressure on a child. For example, I've had parents tell their kids, you better be good. You better listen to that teacher. You better not get in trouble. And they're like, oh my gosh, what is this place called school going to be like? It sounds
Right.
like a prison.
They're sending
Yeah.
their baby out into the world, right? And
Right.
they're very nervous about how that will go and how the world will treat them, right? So, they need a little extra patience and the expectation from teachers that it's not going to go perfectly, and that's not the goal. The goal is that we figure out what those missing skills are and address them. So, can if you can help us with that's where we all need help. Can you describe a strategy or a tool that you found particularly helpful to reduce children feeling nervous or anxious, whether it be on the first day of school or maybe even later in the year?
Sure, Meg. I think that my take on the whole thing is that there's no strategy or tool that's going to be a magic pill to fix a behavior, whether that behavior is mad or sad or nervous, whatever that is. I think that we really have to focus rather on teaching these skills that we're trying to teach young children to manage their big emotions and feelings, teaching those before we ever get to the point where we need a tool or a strategy, right? So before we need them, we can start introducing them. For example, if we're having a child who is having a difficult time and they're breathing heavily because of their emotional state that they're in, then I would have wanted to teach some breathing, like just one simple breathing strategy is plenty, especially at the beginning of the year first. So I might teach that to the students on the first day if I have somebody who's displaying their extreme feelings of anxious or nervousness on the first day of school. I might teach that to the whole class and go, because they're going to be saying something about the other child, right? They're going to be saying something about that child, like, why is he crying? Or his crying is too loud. Or because I've had kids who've cried all day the first day of school and they've cried loudly. So I think that when I address the whole class, of course, not calling out that child is always a good thing. Sometimes I feel like that too when children point out the other child's behavior. I felt like that before. Have you ever felt like that? I know, me too. One thing that's helped me when I feel like that is to take a deep breath in. Let's do it together. And now let's let it out. That's easy to do, and sometimes you can even pretend you're blowing on a flower or whatever your strategy is, but I'm not gonna get too deep in it because 'cause they've got, like, a 2-second attention span the first day of school. I've just taught a strategy to my students, and maybe that child hears it because I can tell you this, if they are crying at the top of their lungs, they still know what's going on in that room.
It's true.
They
It's
are
true.
still looking and observing because at that point, if they've been crying all day, it's attention. It's for, I want you to look at me and I want you to see me and I want you to know that I am feeling this way. And so I've acknowledged that all day long. But so they're still looking around, they're listening.
So, can you give me an example of a quick scenario about how you successfully guided a child from this kind of anxious, more heightened state back to calm?
Sure. So there is a little boy that I remember from one of my classes one year who really challenged me very much. And we've all had students like this before. I will never forget his name. I will never forget what he looks like. I just was really at my wit's end on the first day of school, especially because he had all the big feelings all day long at every single turn. And I quickly realized, though, after a week or two, that his trigger was transitions. He just could not handle them. And once I learned the trigger, because we transition all day long. So he was doing this all day long, and I was observing and observing and observing and going, can't figure out when it is because we transition a lot. And then finally, I realized that it was these time periods, whether we were getting ready to go to lunch or we were coming back from the lunchroom or we were going to recess, coming back from recess all day long. These were his triggers. And so I just talked to him about how he felt when these things were happening. So, how does your body feel? We'll call him Richard. How does your body feel, Richard, when I say it's time to come inside from recess? How does your body feel? What do you feel in your tummy? Because they don't know what body means sometimes. How does it feel in your tummy? And I touch my tummy. How does it feel in your head? How does it feel in your heart? Does it do anything to the way you breathe? What can you tell me how your body feels? That helped him because then once I gave him the words and we practiced it together several times, we had multiple opportunities throughout the day to practice, right? Because we transitioned all day long. And once he got the hang of that, it only took him a few days of me doing that consistently with him. He would say to me how his body felt. And he would say, I start to breathe like this. And I can feel my face feels hot. And it's true, he would get flushed during those periods of time. So providing support during his triggering times to kind of look at him and let him tell me how his body was feeling. And then I could support him in the ways he needed. And one of the ways that I have is now, because I didn't have it in my own classroom, I like to solve my own previous problems, right? Because I think that's what helps teachers the most. And so I have this social story. And in the social story, one of the pages talks about when I'm anxious, my tummy or my head might hurt and my heart might beat fast like a drum. Have you ever felt anxious before?
This is so great. You're helping children be just more aware of
Mhm.
how When we talk about feelings, it's very abstract to them, but they can relate to this language of when you have a stomach ache because you're worried about something. Really, our bodies do change what's happening, and kids need that modeling that you're giving and then that gradual release to help them notice on their own. But
Right.
first, you had to be aware, and then you're helping the child.
Yes. And then I asked the children, how does your body feel? So that they're interacting when I read these stories too, because we don't want to keep them sitting for too long. And these are not long stories by any means, but I'm going to try to make the stories as interactive as possible by inviting their responses appropriately. And then the next page goes on to say, sometimes I might feel anxious when there's an unexpected change in my schedule. And when I say that, those might sound like big words, but I'm pointing to my schedule in the classroom, which is right next to me when I read a story, right? So I'm pointing to it. And then the picture on the page shows a picture of a substitute teacher and the child coming into the classroom and looking like frightened because there's a different teacher. That happened every year when I was absent the first time. They would be like, she left me. Where'd she go? She doesn't love me anymore. And then another one is I might feel anxious when I'm in a new place, right? And it could be the first day of school. Or when I try new things for the first time. I show a picture there of ice skating because my nephew was absolutely adamant that he wanted to ice skate like one of his cousins. So he tried it and he was too scared to get out on the ice. So he was very nervous to try something new. And then I asked, what makes you feel anxious? So I think that's one of the things that you can do in those instances when you need to talk with a child or children about these feelings of being nervous or anxious and in all the different scenarios they might encounter this. Because if we just talk about anxiety as happening as something that happens at the beginning of the year, the next time they feel anxiety, they might be like, it's not the beginning of the year and I feel like this. So I can't be anxious. We want to let them know it can happen in lots of different scenarios and then invite their peers to say something about times they felt anxious. And then I think that will give them more of a broader perspective of what anxious or nervous might feel like.
So, Vanessa, you're teaching kids, I think, hear you say that you're teaching children to be aware of what's happening in their body when they're feeling nervous or anxious. How do you help them incorporate their body to help them deal with this emotion?
I think one of the ways, and I know I've said it before, is that yoga poses can be super helpful. And you don't even have to use the word yoga. You could just say a body movement, right? Or a body position. You could say that. And so one of the ones that I like, and I have done in my own classroom, although you have to have enough space to do it, is the sleeping pose. And that's laying down on your back with your arms and your feet straight, right at your sides, not splayed out like you're making a snow angel. And then just breathing slowly and thinking about how your body feels or reflecting on how your body feels. So I would actually do this with my class. Now they had to make room for me to lay down because I was so much bigger than they were, but and I would do it in front of them to demonstrate. And then they would do it on their own, spreading themselves out so they didn't hurt each other because personal space is challenging when we're laying on our back in the classroom. And then just guiding them through, talking them through. Now think about your feet. How do your feet feel right now? It's like an app I listen to at night when I go to sleep that kind of walks me through calming the different parts of my body, which is highly beneficial to me as an adult. So anyway, walking them through this guided relaxation and talking about how does your tummy feel? How does your head feel? How do your ears feel? And sometimes it would get silly. How does your nose feel? And I think that just having that quiet time for them to just lay flat and reflect on how they feel, whether or not they're getting it the first time we do it or not, doesn't really matter. We're exposing them to the practice, and some children need more exposures to something that we're teaching them, right? So we're going to do this multiple times throughout the year. It's not like I'm teaching this and then just running off to do other things. I'm like not teaching it and then just plowing ahead to teach patterns or numbers or whatever it is. You know what I mean? These are things that are going to help children all their lives. So I'm teaching this consistently throughout the year at different times whenever I notice with my detective teacher glasses on that they need it. And so I think just a pose or a body movement or a body position can be super helpful in this case, especially when children are feeling anxious or nervous, but it can be used for other things as well. And then I think also, Meg, one thing I wanted to say is that sometimes a simple tool, like a squishy ball, I have these little squishy balls. I think you have some experience too with that.
Yes, I have one here. I noted it was in the Seeds of Success lesson on feeling anxious or worried. So I love that you're having children first notice their body and then incorporating some of these tools such as yoga and the squeeze ball to help regulate their body. In our busy, busy world, we really need to overtly teach children how to calm down, how to relax. That's something that
Right?
they may learn at home, but they're in a new environment now and they may need some more support with at school, a reminder, or some children have never learned how to relax or calm. So
Exactly.
helpful. So it strikes me that a lot of classrooms have more than one teacher and then children go home to parents. How important is consistency across staff between home and school when addressing anxious or nervous behavior?
It is so important. I'm glad you asked that question because it is true that children are, once they reach the pre-K stage, they're funneling through a lot of different people each day, especially if you have a half day program. They're coming from home to you. So we're talking about transitions again, really, right? Transitioning from home to school. And then in my case, when I was half day, they would transition from school to a childcare facility or some type of other place that would care for them. And then they were transitioning eventually back to their parents. So they were going through a lot of transitions throughout the day, not to mention all the individual transitions in each of those places, right? So I think that consistency is super important, especially when you have more than one teacher. Because if one of you is on one page and the other of you is on another page, then we get real inconsistency in the classroom. So it's really important that if you do have a co teacher, that you are listening to these social stories and you're participating in these strategies and yoga poses and so forth together so that person can then understand that these are tools because they sometimes might be in charge of handling some of these behaviors, right? I think I talked in the previous episode in this series about how I had a co-teacher who would help calm this one particular little girl down in the calming area, and so she needed to know what the strategies were as well. And so I think that's super important. And then when it comes to the parents, we really need to help them. And so one of the ways, or there's actually a couple of ways to do it. So every week in the Seeds of Success curriculum, we have a black and white version of the social story that goes home with them. So if you are indeed teaching about feelings of nervousness or being anxious, then the parents would receive the parent connection note that explains to them what we're studying, what it is. So there's a portion of it that says this is what feeling anxious or nervous is, and then how to talk to your child about it, a few book recommendations. And so they get that. And then at the end of the week, after we've learned all of the lessons in the curriculum, then we send home the printable social story. And on the back of each of these printable social stories is an area where the child can draw a picture of one of the strategies that they learned during that particular week. And so I think this really helps level the playing field with what happens at home and what happens at school. Now, of course, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't always make them drink. And some people aren't going to read these, and some people won't really get why they're important. But that just tells us that we need to maybe make a different approach with those particular parents. Maybe they're not going to read a printed note. Maybe they need to have it sent to them electronically in a text or something like that. Or maybe they're not going to read a story at home, sadly. Maybe they'll get a book from the library. I don't know. It just depends. But there's different options and different entry points for them to join this conversation with us and support what we're doing in the classroom.
Wonderful. That is also helpful. And for maybe for some families, it's just a heads up about what we're learning at school. And it's maybe something already being practiced at home. Some families will use it. Some families will just use it to know what's going on. But either way, you're making that effort to make those home and school connections. And you're right, sometimes different schools and programs have different rules about how can you do it electronically. There's all kinds of ways, but you're ready to go. Materials make it so easy. Before we finish, what's one piece of advice that you'd like to give preschool teachers who are challenged by anxious behaviors in their classroom?
I think the biggest thing that I've always told teachers over the years is don't take it personally. I can guarantee you there's no preschooler out there who comes to school and says in their little preschooler mind, I am here to make Mrs. Levin's day a living nightmare. That's not what they're thinking, right? They think about themselves. They're egocentric, right? So they're going to express how they feel by their actions. And we learned that all behavior is communication. So don't take it personally. It's not about you. It's about them. And we talked about that in the beginning.
Thank you again. This is just enlightening. I love to hear your stories. Vanessa's been through it. She knows what to do. And we can all just rest assured we don't have to have all the answers. We just need to find these missing skills and address them.
Absolutely. And I'd love to thank you again, Meg, for joining us as the guest host for this social emotional learning series.
It's my pleasure. I learn something every time. It's always fun to talk to you, Vanessa.
And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, I'm Vanessa, and this is Meg.